My wife decided to invest our life savings in her brother's cryptocurrency scheme without telling me. When it all collapsed, she expected me to bail everyone out. I said no. Now her entire family is calling me heartless, but I'm done being their financial safety net. Let me tell you about the night my entire world got turned upside down, like a house of cards in a hurricane. My name's Michael Chen, and until that moment in December, I thought I had my life pretty well figured out. Sure, we weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination. The mortgage on our little ranch house in Riverside, California, was eating up most of my paycheck from the logistics company where I'd worked my way up to operations manager over the past 7 years. Our 2 kids, Lily and Sam, were constantly outgrowing their clothes faster than we could replace them, and my wife Rebecca's job at the local marketing firm barely covered childcare and groceries. But we were stable. We had a plan. We'd been saving for 5 years to finally take that family trip to Disney World that we'd been promising the kids since they were toddlers. We had almost $8,000 in our joint savings account, which felt like a fortune to people like us who clipped coupons and shopped at Target instead of the fancy stores Rebecca's friends preferred. I was in the garage that Tuesday night, trying to fix Sam's bicycle chain for the 3rd time that month, when Rebecca came out with that look on her face. You know the one. Know the one. The expression that wives get when they're about to tell you something that's going to ruin your entire week. She was holding her laptop, which should have been my first warning sign because Rebecca only brought her computer to me when she needed help with something technical or when she'd done something spectacularly stupid online. Mike, she said, setting the laptop down on my workbench next to my collection of rusty screwdrivers and half-empty oil cans. I need to show you something. I looked up from Sam's bike, already dreading whatever was coming next. What's up, Becca? That's when she opened the laptop and showed me our bank account, our joint savings account that should have had $7,847.63 in it. The account that now showed a balance of $127.83. For a moment, I thought there had to be some mistake. Maybe the bank's website was glitching. Maybe someone had hacked our account. Maybe I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination from working too many overtime shifts. Rebecca? I said slowly, setting down Sam's bike and wiping my greasy hands on an old rag. Where's our money? She bit her lip, which was something she always did when she was nervous or guilty or about to deliver news that would make me want to punch a hole in the wall. I can explain. Those 3 words. I can explain. In the history of marriage, has anyone ever said, I can explain before delivering good news? Has anyone ever followed those words with, I can explain why I just won the lottery? Or, I can explain why I got promoted? No. I can explain is what people say right before they tell you they've set your life on fire and forgot to buy insurance. You invested it, I said, because I could see the confirmation numbers on the screen, the transfers to some cryptocurrency exchange I'd never heard of. You invested our savings without telling me. It's not what you think, she said quickly, which was Rebecca speak for, it's exactly what you think, but I'm going to try to spin it so you don't divorce me. Then what is it, Becca? Because it looks like you took every penny we've saved for 5 years and gambled it away on some internet money scheme. She flinched at the word gambled, which told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't gambling, Mike. It was investing. Danny explained the whole thing to me. He's been making incredible returns on this new cryptocurrency called MoonCoin. He showed me his portfolio. He's made over $50,000 in just 6 months. Danny. Of course, it was Danny. Rebecca's older brother, the same guy who tried to sell us on his pyramid scheme vitamin business 3 years ago. The same genius who'd borrowed $500 from us to start a food truck and then somehow managed to lose money selling burgers to construction workers. The same financial mastermind who lived in his ex-wife's garage and drove a Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and a bumper held on with duct tape. So you gave our life savings to your brother to invest in pretend internet money, I said, trying to keep my voice level even though I wanted to scream loud enough to wake up the entire neighborhood. It's not pretend money, Rebecca protested. Danny showed me all the research. MoonCoin is revolutionary technology. It's going to change everything. The early investors are going to make millions. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, which was a technique my father had taught me for dealing with frustrating situations. It worked pretty well when I was dealing with difficult customers at work or when the kids were having meltdowns about bedtime. But this situation required counting to about 1,000. Becca, I said, opening my eyes and looking directly at my wife of 9 years. Please tell me you didn't actually believe that Danny, the guy who couldn't successfully sell hamburgers to hungry people, had discovered some secret investment that was going to make us rich. Her face flushed red, which meant she was either embarrassed or angry. Probably both. Danny's been studying cryptocurrency for months. He knows what he's doing. Danny studies cryptocurrency the same way I study quantum physics, which is to say, not at all. You're being mean, she said, crossing her arms over her chest like she was building a wall between us. Danny's family. We're supposed to support family. And there it was. The magic word that Rebecca's family used to justify every stupid decision they'd ever made. Family. Like being related to someone automatically made their terrible ideas worth pursuing. Like sharing DNA gave you some kind of special insight into financial markets or business opportunities or basic common sense. Supporting family doesn't mean giving them our children's college fund to play with, I said, gesturing toward the laptop screen that was still showing our decimated bank account. Supporting family means helping Danny find a real job, not enabling his get-rich-quick fantasies. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme, Rebecca insisted. Danny showed me the charts. MoonCoin has been steadily climbing for months. He said we're getting in at the perfect time. I had to laugh at that, even though absolutely nothing about this situation was funny. Becca, do you remember 3 years ago when Danny showed us charts proving that his vitamin business was going to make us millionaires? Or 2 years ago when he had charts showing how his dropshipping business was going to revolutionize online retail? She looked away, which meant she remembered but didn't want to admit it. Those were different, she said quietly. This is cryptocurrency. It's the future. No, I said, closing the laptop because I couldn't stand looking at our empty account anymore. This is the same pattern, just with different buzzwords. Danny finds some new trend, convinces himself he's an expert, shows everyone inflated projections, and then loses everyone's money when reality sets in. But what if you're wrong? Rebecca asked, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. What if MoonCoin really does take off? What if we just made the best investment of our lives? I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw someone I didn't recognize. The Rebecca I'd married was cautious with money. She was the one who insisted on comparing prices before making major purchases. She was the one who made grocery lists and stuck to budgets and worried about having enough emergency savings. This woman standing in my garage, defending her decision to gamble our life savings on her brother's cryptocurrency fantasies, was a stranger. Becca, I said, trying one more time to reach the person I'd married. Even if I'm wrong, even if MoonCoin somehow becomes the most valuable investment in history, you made this decision without talking to me. You took our money, our family's security, and you handed it over to your brother without even mentioning it to your husband. Do you understand how that feels? She was quiet for a long moment, and I thought maybe she was starting to understand what she'd done. Maybe she was realizing that marriages are supposed to be partnerships, where major financial decisions get discussed instead of made unilaterally in secret. But then she lifted her chin with that stubborn expression she got when she'd decided she was right and the rest of the world was wrong. I did it for us, she said. I did it for our future. For Lily and Sam's college funds. For the house we want to buy. For all the things we talk about but never seem to be able to afford. I saw an opportunity, and I took it. You saw an opportunity to trust your brother with our life savings, I corrected. The same brother who's never successfully completed a business venture in his entire adult life. Danny's different now, Rebecca said, but her voice lacked conviction. He's learned from his mistakes. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Rebecca slept next to me, probably dreaming about all the money we were going to make when MoonCoin inevitably soared to the moon like Danny had promised. But I knew better. I'd seen this movie before, and it always ended the same way, with Danny apologizing profusely while explaining how the failure was everyone's fault except his own. The worst part wasn't even the money, although losing 5 years of savings definitely sucked. The worst part was the trust. Rebecca had looked at our marriage, our partnership, our shared financial goals, and decided that none of that mattered as much as her brother's latest get-rich-quick scheme. She'd chosen Danny's promises over my input, his track record over our stability, his dreams over our reality. I'd been married to Rebecca for 9 years. We'd bought a house together, raised 2 kids together, survived her father's cancer scare and my mother's stroke together. But in all that time, she'd never once made a major decision without talking to me first. Until now. As I listened to her breathing next to me, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. The woman I'd married would never have risked our children's security on a cryptocurrency investment. The woman I'd married would never have trusted her brother's financial advice over her husband's concerns. The woman I'd married would never have hidden a major financial transaction from her partner, which meant either Rebecca had changed or I'd never really known her at all. 3 days later, MoonCoin crashed. Not a gentle decline or a market correction, but a full-scale catastrophic collapse that made the evening news. Apparently, the whole thing had been what financial experts called a pump and dump scheme, where early investors artificially inflated the value before selling everything and leaving later investors holding worthless digital tokens. Danny, it turned out, hadn't been one of the early investors making $50,000 like he'd claimed. He'd been one of the suckers, just like us, who'd bought in right before the crash. His portfolio, which he'd shown Rebecca as proof of the investment's potential, had apparently been fabricated using some photo editing software he'd found on YouTube. The whole thing was so predictably Danny that I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Rebecca took the news about as well as you'd expect. She spent most of Saturday crying in our bedroom while I tried to explain to Lily and Sam why we couldn't go to Disney World anymore, without actually telling them that their mother had gambled away their vacation fund on internet monopoly money. "Daddy, why is Mommy sad?" Lily asked while I was making her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch. "Mommy's just disappointed about something," I said, which was technically true if you considered losing your family's life savings to your brother's cryptocurrency scam a disappointment rather than a complete disaster. "Did someone die?" Sam asked. Because in his 6-year-old mind, crying usually meant death. "No, buddy, nobody died. Mommy just made a mistake and now she's upset about it." Which was putting it mildly, but what else was I supposed to tell them? That their mother had trusted their Uncle Danny's financial advice despite his lengthy history of failed business ventures? That our Disney World trip had been converted into worthless digital tokens that would probably never recover their value? That afternoon, while the kids were watching cartoons in the living room, Rebecca finally emerged from our bedroom looking like she'd spent the last 48 hours in a blender. "Mike," she said, sitting down at our kitchen table like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I need to tell you something." Here we go, I thought. More bad news. Because apparently losing our life savings wasn't enough drama for 1 week. "What is it, Becca?" She took a deep breath, the kind people take before jumping off a high dive or confessing to murder. I called my dad. My father-in-law, Robert Martinez, was one of those guys who'd worked construction his whole life, saved every penny he could, and managed to accumulate a decent nest egg through decades of careful financial planning. He owned his house outright, drove paid-off vehicles, and had the kind of retirement account that people our age could only dream about. He was also the kind of man who believed in personal responsibility, hard work, and the importance of learning from your mistakes rather than being rescued from them. "Okay," I said carefully. "What did you tell him?" I told him about MoonCoin, about the investment, about how we lost everything. I waited for the other shoe to drop, because Rebecca wouldn't have brought up her father unless there was more to the story. "And?" I prompted. "And I asked him to help us." There it was, the other shoe, dropping like a piano from a 10th-story window. "You asked your father to replace the money you lost gambling on cryptocurrency?" "It wasn't gambling," Rebecca said, but her protest sounded weak even to her. "It was an investment that didn't work out. These things happen. These things happen to people who make risky investments with money they can afford to lose," I said, "not to people who bet their children's future on their brother's latest scheme." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, which might have softened my heart a few days ago. But right now, I was having trouble feeling sympathetic towards someone who destroyed our financial security and then immediately started looking for someone else to fix the problem. "What did your dad say?" I asked. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He said he'd think about it, but he wants to talk to you first." Of course he did. Robert Martinez had always liked me, but he wasn't stupid. He'd seen his son Danny's track record with money, and he'd probably figured out that lending us cash would just enable more bad decisions down the road. "Becca," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle, because despite everything, I still loved this woman, even if I didn't particularly like her right now. "What makes you think asking your father for money is the solution here?" "Because we need help," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "We don't have any savings anymore. How are we supposed to handle an emergency? What if the car breaks down? What if one of the kids gets hurt?" She was right about needing help, but wrong about what kind of help we needed. Borrowing money from her father would just put us back where we started, except now we'd owe someone we cared about instead of just being broke. "We're supposed to learn from this," I said. "We're supposed to figure out how to rebuild our savings through hard work and better decisions, not by running to Daddy every time your brother talks you into a bad investment." "You're being cruel," Rebecca said, and there was anger creeping into her voice now. "My family is trying to help us, and you're acting like that's somehow wrong." "Your family is trying to help us clean up a mess that your family created," I pointed out. "Danny talked you into this investment, and now your father is supposed to bail us out when it goes bad. Do you see the pattern here?" She stared at me like I just suggested we sell one of the children to pay our bills. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means your family creates problems and then expects other people to solve them. Danny gets you to invest our savings in his cryptocurrency scheme, and when it fails, Robert is supposed to write us a check to make everything okay. Nobody learns anything. Nobody takes responsibility. And 6 months from now, when Danny comes up with his next brilliant business idea, we'll be right back here having the same conversation." "That's not fair," Rebecca protested. "Danny didn't force me to invest. I made that decision myself." Finally, the first sign of personal responsibility I'd heard from her since this whole nightmare started. "You're right," I said. "You did make that decision yourself. without talking to me, without considering the risks, without thinking about what would happen to our family if you were wrong. So why should your father have to pay for your mistake? The conversation went downhill from there, with Rebecca accusing me of being unsupportive and me pointing out that supporting your spouse doesn't mean enabling their worst impulses. We ended up not speaking to each other for the rest of the weekend, which was probably for the best, since I was having trouble forming complete sentences that didn't include words like irresponsible and catastrophically stupid. Monday morning, I went to work and tried to pretend that my home life hadn't imploded over the weekend. But focusing on shipping schedules and inventory reports while your marriage falls apart is like trying to do yoga during an earthquake. Technically possible, but not particularly effective. Around lunchtime, my phone rang. Robert Martinez. Mike, he said in that gravelly voice that came from 30 years of shouting over construction equipment. Rebecca tells me you two are having some financial difficulties. That was one way to put it. Another way would be to say that his daughter had committed financial suicide and was now looking for someone to perform CPR on our bank account. That's right, Mr. Martinez. Rebecca made an investment that didn't work out. There was a pause, and I could practically hear him choosing his words carefully. She said she gave the money to Danny to invest in some kind of computer currency. Cryptocurrency, I corrected. And yes, that's what happened. Another pause. How much money are we talking about, Mike? Almost $8,000. Everything we'd saved for the past 5 years. He was quiet for so long that I thought maybe the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice had that tired quality that comes from being disappointed by people you love. Jesus, Mike, I'm sorry. I know how hard you two work for your money. We did work hard for it, I said. That's why losing it hurts so much. Rebecca wants me to help you get back on your feet, he said. She thinks I should lend you the money to replace what you lost. Here it comes, I thought. The part where he either agrees to enable his daughter's irresponsibility or forces me to be the bad guy who refuses help from family. What do you think about that? I asked. Robert was quiet again, and I found myself holding my breath while I waited for his answer. I think, he said finally, that sometimes the best way to help someone is to let them figure out their own problems. Relief flooded through me like someone had just told me I didn't have cancer. I think you're right, Mr. Martinez. Don't get me wrong, Mike. I love my daughter, and I love those grandkids. If you were talking about medical bills or something truly unavoidable, I'd write you a check without hesitation. But this was a choice Rebecca made, and choices have consequences. I appreciate that, sir. The problem is, he continued, Rebecca's not going to see it that way. She's going to think I'm being heartless, and she's going to think you talked me out of helping her. He was right, of course. Rebecca had grown up in a family where her father fixed problems and her brother created them, and everyone just accepted that as the natural order of things. The idea that she might have to live with the consequences of her own decisions was going to seem foreign and cruel. I can handle Rebecca, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. I hope so, son, because I have a feeling this is just the beginning. That evening, Rebecca was waiting for me when I got home from work. She was sitting at the kitchen table with that expression that wives get when they're about to start a fight they've been planning all day. Did you talk to my father? She asked before I'd even finished hanging up my jacket. He called me, I said, which was technically true. And? I sat down across from her, trying to figure out how to explain that her father wasn't going to bail us out without making it sound like I'd talked him out of it. He's not going to lend us the money, Becca. Her face went through about 5 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Surprise, disappointment, anger, betrayal, and finally settling on rage. What did you say to him? She demanded. I didn't say anything to him. He made his own decision. Bullshit, she said, which was harsh language for Rebecca. She usually saved the profanity for when she stubbed her toe or when Danny called with his latest business idea. My father would help us if you hadn't poisoned him against me. Your father would help us if we needed help with something that wasn't our own fault, I corrected. He's not going to enable bad financial decisions, and neither am I. Enable? She repeated the word like it was something toxic. Is that what you think this is? You think I'm some kind of addict who needs tough love? I think you made a terrible decision without consulting me, and now you're looking for someone else to fix the problem instead of taking responsibility for it. That's when she really lost it. Not the quiet crying from over the weekend, but full-scale fury that probably woke up the neighbors and definitely traumatized our children. I'm taking responsibility, she screamed. I'm trying to fix this. I'm trying to get our money back so we can move on with our lives. Getting someone else to give us money isn't taking responsibility, I said, raising my voice to match hers. Taking responsibility would be admitting that you made a mistake, learning from it, and rebuilding our savings the same way we built them the first time. That will take years, she shouted. What are we supposed to do until then? What if something happens? What if we need money for an emergency? Then we'll deal with it the same way people dealt with emergencies before they had savings accounts, I said. We'll figure it out. Cut expenses, work extra hours, ask for help from people who aren't family members with terrible track records. You're being ridiculous, she said, but her voice was starting to lose some of its heat. This is what family is for, to help each other during difficult times. Family is for emotional support and love and being there for each other, I said. Family is not for enabling each other's worst impulses or fixing problems that could have been avoided with better judgment. Rebecca stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to process the idea that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the victim in this situation. But then her phone rang. Danny. She answered it, and within 30 seconds, I could hear him through the speaker, talking fast and excited like he always did when he had a new scheme to pitch. Becca, you're not going to believe this, he said, his voice practically vibrating with enthusiasm. I found out what went wrong with MoonCoin, and I know how we can get our money back. I watched my wife's face light up like someone had just told her she'd won the lottery. And I knew, with the kind of certainty that comes from being married to someone for 9 years, that we were about to have this exact same conversation all over again in a few months. Because Rebecca hadn't learned anything from losing our life savings. She just learned that her husband and her father weren't willing to clean up her messes, which meant she'd have to be more careful about who she trusted with her bad decisions. But Danny? Danny was family, and family always had each other's backs, even when they were leading each other off a cliff. The phone call with Danny lasted 45 minutes, during which I listened to my brother-in-law explain his latest theory about cryptocurrency markets and his foolproof plan for recovering our losses. Apparently, the MoonCoin crash had been caused by market manipulation by big institutions who were trying to shake out weak hands before the price inevitably soared to new heights. It was the same story every failed investor tells themselves when their get-rich-quick scheme doesn't work out. It's never poor judgment or bad luck or simple greed. It's always market manipulation, conspiracy, or some external force that prevented their brilliant strategy from working. What made it worse was watching Rebecca nod along with every word, her face getting more hopeful with each ridiculous claim Danny made. By the time he started explaining his new investment strategy involving something called DeepCoin that was guaranteed to recover our MoonCoin losses, she was practically glowing with renewed optimism. Danny says DeepCoin is different, she told me after hanging up. It's backed by artificial intelligence and blockchain technology that makes it impossible to manipulate. I stared at my wife, the mother of my children, the woman I'd thought I knew better than anyone else in the world, and realized that I was married to someone who was either incredibly naive or completely delusional. Becca, I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though I wanted to throw her phone out the window. Danny just lost our life savings on his last guaranteed investment. What makes you think his advice is worth following now? Because he learned from his mistakes, she said, using the same tone of voice she used when explaining to the kids why vegetables were good for them. He understands what went wrong with MoonCoin, and he knows how to avoid those problems with DeepCoin. Danny understands cryptocurrency the same way I understand nuclear physics, I said, which is to say, not at all. You're being negative, Rebecca said, crossing her arms again. Danny's done his research. He showed me the white paper. The white paper, of course. Every cryptocurrency scam came with a white paper, a document full of technical jargon and grand promises that was designed to make gullible investors feel like they were making informed decisions instead of just gambling on digital lottery tickets. Becca, listen to yourself, I said. 3 days ago, you were crying because Danny's last researched investment wiped out our savings. Now, you want to trust him with more money we don't have because he showed you another document you don't understand. I understand more than you think I do, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Danny explained everything to me. Danny explained MoonCoin to you too, remember? Right before it crashed and took our vacation fund with it. That seemed to hit home because Rebecca's face fell and she looked away. For a moment, I thought maybe she was finally starting to see the pattern. Maybe she was realizing that Danny's track record with investments was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. But then she straightened up with that stubborn expression that meant she decided I was the problem, not her brother's terrible advice. You know what? She said. Maybe the reason we never get ahead financially is because you're too scared to take any risks. Maybe if you were more supportive of opportunities, instead of shooting down every idea that comes along, we'd be in a better position. And there it was. Somehow, our financial problems had become my fault for being too conservative, too cautious, too unwilling to gamble our children's security on her brother's cryptocurrency fantasies. I'm not opposed to taking risks, I said. I'm opposed to taking stupid risks with money we can't afford to lose. There's a difference. Every investment involves risk, Rebecca said, like she was quoting from some financial self-help book. You can't expect to make money without being willing to lose money. You're right, I said. But there's a difference between calculated risks and reckless gambling. Investing our emergency fund in a cryptocurrency recommended by someone with no financial education or successful track record isn't a calculated risk. It's just stupid. Rebecca's eyes flashed with anger, and I could tell I'd crossed some invisible line in her mind. In her version of events, she was a forward-thinking investor who'd been let down by market forces beyond her control. I was the negative husband who refused to support her entrepreneurial spirit. "Fine," she said, standing up from the table like she was making some kind of dramatic exit. "If you're not willing to help us recover from this setback, then I'll figure out another way." "What's that supposed to mean?" She paused in the doorway, and for just a moment, I saw something in her expression that made my stomach drop. It was the same look she'd had when she showed me our empty bank account, the same mixture of guilt and defiance that meant she'd already made a decision and was now trying to figure out how to justify it. "It means I'm not giving up," she said. "Danny thinks he can get us back on track if we can come up with some seed money for the Deepcoin investment." "Becca, we don't have any seed money. We don't have any money at all, remember?" "There are other ways to raise money," she said cryptically, then disappeared upstairs before I could ask what she meant. I sat in our kitchen for a long time after that, listening to the sounds of my family settling in for the night. Lily practicing her violin in her bedroom, Sam playing with his action figures in the living room, Rebecca moving around upstairs, probably researching Deepcoin on her laptop and getting more excited about Danny's latest scheme. This was my life now. Not the stable, predictable existence I'd been building for 9 years, but some kind of financial soap opera, where my wife kept finding new ways to gamble away our security while I played the role of the unreasonable husband who didn't support her dreams. I thought about calling Robert Martinez, Rebecca's father, to warn him that his daughter might be planning another investment disaster. But what would I say? That my wife was considering throwing more money at her brother's cryptocurrency schemes? That she was looking for other ways to raise money for an investment that would probably fail just as spectacularly as the last one? Besides, Robert had made his position clear. He wasn't going to enable Rebecca's bad decisions. And he expected me to handle my own marriage problems without running to him for help. The problem was, I was starting to realize that you can't handle someone who doesn't want to be handled. Rebecca had made up her mind that Danny's investment advice was worth following, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. She'd decided that our financial problems were the result of my excessive caution rather than her poor judgment. And she was actively looking for ways to continue making the same mistakes that had gotten us into this mess in the first place. You can't save someone from their own bad decisions, especially when they don't think their decisions are bad. That night, I lay in bed next to my wife and wondered what our marriage was going to look like 6 months from now, after she'd found some new way to gamble away money we didn't have on investments we didn't understand. Would we still be living in the same house? Would we still be married? Would our kids still have college funds? Or would Rebecca have convinced herself that investing their education money in Danny's latest scheme was actually a smart way to secure their future? I didn't have answers to any of those questions, but I had a sick feeling that I was going to find out sooner than I wanted to. The next morning, I discovered what Rebecca had meant by other ways to raise money when I found her in our bedroom, going through her jewelry box like she was conducting an inventory. "What are you doing?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. "I'm seeing what we have that might be worth something," she said, holding up the diamond earrings I'd given her for our 5th anniversary. "Danny says we only need about $2,000 to get started with Deepcoin." $2,000. The amount kept getting smaller, like a dealer offering a discount to get someone hooked on drugs. First, it had been $8,000 for MoonCoin. Now, it was only $2,000 for Deepcoin. By next month, Danny would probably have a scheme that only required a few $100s and a credit card number. "Becca, those earrings were a gift," I said. "They're not an investment fund." "They're just sitting in my jewelry box," she said, like the sentimental value of anniversary gifts was somehow irrelevant. "At least this way, they can help us build a better future." "A better future," I repeated, "by gambling them away on another one of Danny's cryptocurrency schemes." She turned to face me, holding the earrings in her palm like they were poker chips instead of symbols of our marriage milestones. "It's not gambling, Mike. Danny showed me the projections. Deepcoin is expected to increase in value by over 300% in the next 6 months. Expected by whom? I wanted to ask. The same experts who expected MoonCoin to go to the moon? The same financial geniuses who created the white paper that convinced her to invest our life savings in digital tokens that were now worth less than the paper they weren't printed on? But I could see in her eyes that she'd already made up her mind. The earrings were going to be sold. The money was going to Danny. And in 6 months, we'd be having the same conversation about whatever remained of our assets after Deepcoin inevitably crashed. What's next? I asked. After you lose the earring money, what are you planning to sell? Your wedding ring? My tools? The kids' bikes? You're being dramatic, she said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. This is different. Danny's learned from his mistakes. Danny's mistake was talking you into giving him our money in the first place, I said. And instead of learning from that mistake, you're planning to give him more money. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe I was finally getting through to her. Maybe she was starting to understand that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results. But then she looked up at me with that expression she got when she decided I was being unreasonable. You know what your problem is, Mike? She said, and closing the jewelry box with more force than necessary. You're so afraid of losing money that you can't see opportunities when they're right in front of you. Danny's offering us a chance to not just recover our losses, but to actually get ahead for once. And you want to throw that away because you're too scared to take a risk. I'm scared of losing what little we have left, I corrected. There's a difference between being cautious and being scared or into $0, which is what actually happened. She flinched, but pressed on. That's why Deepcoin is different. Danny learned from the MoonCoin situation. He understands the market better now. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and realized that she'd crossed some invisible line in her mind. She'd gone from being someone who made careful financial decisions to someone who believed that her brother's investment advice was worth following despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Becca, I said, taking her hand. I love you. I've loved you since the day we met, but I'm not going to stand by and watch you gamble away everything we've worked for. She pulled her hand away. So what are you saying? I'm saying that if you sell those earrings to give Danny more money for another cryptocurrency scheme, I'm done. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge, and I could see Rebecca processing what I just said. She was probably wondering if I was bluffing, if this was just another empty threat meant to scare her into compliance. But I wasn't bluffing. I'd reached my limit. I'd tried reasoning with her, tried explaining the risks, tried appealing to her sense of responsibility to our family. Nothing had worked. She was determined to follow Danny down whatever financial rabbit hole he'd found next, and I wasn't going to let her drag our children with her. You're giving me an ultimatum? She asked. I'm telling you where I stand, I said. You can choose Danny's investment advice, or you can choose your marriage. But you can't have both. That's not fair, she said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had held earlier. You're asking me to choose between my family and my husband. I'm asking you to choose between your brother's terrible financial advice and your children's security. There's a difference. Rebecca was quiet for a long time, staring down at the jewelry box like it held the answers to all of life's problems. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. What if you're wrong? What if Deepcoin really does take off and we miss out on the opportunity of a lifetime? Then we'll miss out, I said, and we'll still have our house, our jobs, our family intact. We'll still be able to look our kids in the eye and tell them that we put their security above our greed. It's not greed, she protested. It's wanting a better life for our family. A better life doesn't come from gambling, I said. It comes from hard work, smart decisions, and putting your family first. Danny's investment schemes aren't going to give us a better life. They're just going to give us more stress, more debt, and more reasons to fight. She was crying now, quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks like she was mourning something that had already died. I just wanted us to have more, she said. I wanted to be able to give the kids things we never had. I wanted to not have to worry about every penny. I know, I said, and I did know. I understood the dream, the desire to break free from the paycheck-to-paycheck existence that had defined our entire marriage. But I also understood that dreams built on bad decisions usually turned into nightmares. But this isn't the way, Becca. Danny's schemes aren't going to solve our financial problems. They're just going to create new ones. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. For a moment, I thought maybe we'd turned a corner. Maybe she was finally seeing the situation clearly. But then her phone buzzed with a text message. She looked at it, and I saw her face change. The doubt disappeared, replaced by that familiar expression of excitement and possibility. Danny says he needs to know by tonight, she said, showing me the screen. The Deepcoin presale starts tomorrow, and if we wait, we'll miss the early investor pricing. Of course. There was always some deadline, some artificial urgency designed to prevent potential investors from thinking too carefully about what they were doing. It was the same tactic used by every scam artist, cult leader, and predatory salesperson throughout history. Becca, I said, but she was already standing up, the jewelry box in her hands. I'm sorry, Mike, she said, and she sounded like she meant it. But I can't live the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if we'd just been brave enough to take a chance. She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at me. I hope you'll understand someday, she said. I hope you'll see that I did this for us. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in our bedroom with the crushing realization that my marriage was over. Not officially, not yet, but in every way that mattered. The woman I'd married wouldn't have chosen her brother's investment advice over her husband's concerns. The woman I'd married wouldn't have gambled away their children's security for a chance at easy money. I sat there for a long time, listening to the sounds of Rebecca moving around downstairs, probably looking up jewelry appraisal websites and calculating how much money she could get for the earrings. In the distance, I could hear Lily practicing her violin and Sam playing with his toys, blissfully unaware that their parents' marriage was disintegrating around them. By evening, the earrings were gone. Rebecca had driven to 3 different jewelry stores before finding one that would give her the $2,000 Danny needed for the Deepcoin investment. She came home excited, talking about how the blockchain technology was revolutionary and how we were getting in on the ground floor of the next big thing. I listened to her explain the investment strategy, watched her show me the website with its professional-looking charts and testimonials from satisfied investors, and felt something die inside my chest. Not love, exactly, but trust. The fundamental belief that the person you've chosen to share your life with has your back, that they'll make decisions with your family's best interests at heart. 3 weeks later, Deepcoin crashed too. The news came on a Thursday morning while I was getting ready for work. Rebecca's phone started buzzing with calls from Danny, each one more frantic than the last. Apparently, the blockchain analytics had been fabricated, the revolutionary technology had been copied from an existing cryptocurrency, and the investment company behind Deepcoin had disappeared overnight with everyone's money. Rebecca took the news harder than she had the MoonCoin crash. This time, there was no crying, no dramatic emotional breakdown. Just a kind of hollow shock, like someone who'd been hit by lightning and was still trying to figure out what had happened. "I don't understand," she said, staring at her phone, where Danny's latest message explained that the Deepcoin developers had been arrested for fraud. The website looked so professional. The white paper made sense. How could this happen again? I wanted to feel sorry for her. Part of me did feel sorry for her. But a bigger part of me was angry, frustrated, and tired of watching her make the same mistakes over and over while expecting different results. It happened again because you trusted Danny again. I said, probably more harshly than necessary, because you let him convince you that this time was different, that he'd learned from his mistakes, that cryptocurrency was going to solve all our problems. She looked at me with empty eyes, like someone who'd just woken up from a dream and was trying to remember where they were. "What are we going to do now?" she asked. "We aren't going to do anything," I said, putting on my jacket and grabbing my keys. "You are going to figure out how to explain to the kids why we can't afford their school activities this semester. You are going to call your brother and tell him that his investment advice isn't welcome in this house anymore. And you are going to think very carefully about whether you want to stay married to someone who keeps putting your family's security at risk." I left for work without kissing her goodbye, which was probably petty, but I was tired of pretending that our marriage was still functioning normally. Rebecca had chosen her brother's financial fantasies over our family's stability. Not once, but twice. She'd ignored my concerns, dismissed my warnings, and gambled away assets we couldn't afford to lose. More importantly, she'd shown me that when push came to shove, Danny's dreams mattered more to her than my peace of mind. The rest of the day passed in a blur of inventory reports and shipping schedules, routine work that kept my hands busy while my mind tried to process what my life was going to look like going forward. The obvious solution was divorce, but that would mean disrupting the kids' lives, selling the house, splitting custody, and all of the other complications that come with dissolving a 9-year marriage. The other option was to try to rebuild trust with someone who'd proven twice that her judgment was fatally flawed when it came to money. Someone who was willing to risk our children's security for the possibility of easy profits. Someone who trusted her brother's advice more than her husband's concerns. Neither option seemed particularly appealing. When I got home that evening, I found Rebecca sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers spread out in front of her. Bank statements, credit card bills, insurance policies, the kind of documents that people only pull out when they're trying to figure out how deep in the hole they've dug themselves. "How bad is it?" I asked, sitting down across from her. "Bad," she said without looking up. "We've got about $300 in checking, nothing in savings, and the mortgage is due next week." I'd been expecting this conversation for weeks, ever since she'd sold the earrings to fund Danny's latest scheme. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, losing $2,000 isn't just an inconvenience, it's a catastrophe. "What about credit cards?" I asked. "Maxed out," she said, finally meeting my eyes. I had to use them to cover the utilities and groceries after I gave Danny the earring money. Of course she had, because gambling away cash wasn't destructive enough. She'd had to borrow money to replace the money she'd gambled away. We were now paying interest on Danny's investment losses, which was probably the most expensive financial education in the history of higher learning. So what's your plan? I asked. She shuffled through the papers like they might contain some hidden solution she'd missed the first 5 times she'd looked at them. I was thinking maybe we could take out a home equity loan, she said. Use some of the house value to get back on our feet. A home equity loan. Taking on debt secured by our house to pay for living expenses and credit card bills that existed because of her brother's investment advice. It was like watching someone pour gasoline on a fire to try to put it out. Absolutely not, I said. Mike, we don't have a choice. We need money to cover the bills, and it's the only option we have. It's not the only option, I said. We could get second jobs. We could cut expenses. We could ask your parents for a short-term loan to cover the mortgage while we figure things out. My parents already said no, Rebecca reminded me. They said no to replacing our investment losses, I corrected. This is different. This is asking for help with basic living expenses because we're in a genuine emergency. She was quiet for a moment, probably thinking about having to call her father and admit that the Deepcoin investment had failed just as spectacularly as the MoonCoin investment. What if they say no again? She asked. Then we figure out something else. But we don't risk our house to pay for your brother's mistakes. They're not just Danny's mistakes, she said, and there was a defensive edge creeping back into her voice. I made the decision to invest. I take responsibility for that. Finally, some acknowledgement that she'd made choices that had consequences. Good, I said. Then you can take responsibility for finding a solution that doesn't involve putting our home at risk. The conversation continued for another hour, covering the same ground we'd been covering for weeks. Rebecca wanted quick fixes and easy solutions. I wanted sustainable changes and lessons learned. She thought taking on debt would solve our immediate problems. I thought taking on debt would create bigger problems down the road. Eventually, we reached a compromise of sorts. Rebecca would call her parents and honestly explain our financial situation without mentioning any new investment opportunities. If they were willing to help with a short-term loan, we'd accept it and pay them back as quickly as possible. If they weren't willing to help, we'd figure out other ways to cut expenses and increase income. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than risking our house or listening to more of Danny's financial advice. 2 days later, Robert Martinez drove over to our house with a check for $3,000 and the kind of serious expression that meant someone was about to get a lecture they'd never forget. He sat down at our kitchen table, the same table where Rebecca had shown me our empty bank account, and looked at both of us like we were teenagers who'd been caught sneaking out after curfew. Let me make something clear, he said in that voice he probably used when managing construction crews. This is a loan, not a gift. I expect to be paid back within 6 months with interest. Of course, Daddy, Rebecca said. We really appreciate. He held up a hand to stop her. I'm not done. This is the only time I'm going to bail you out of a financial mess caused by poor judgment. If you lose this money on another one of Danny's schemes, don't call me for help. Rebecca's face flushed red. It's not like that. We learned our lesson. Did you? Robert asked, turning his attention to her. Because from where I sit, it looks like you learned that when you make bad financial decisions, someone else will always be there to clean up the mess. The silence that followed was uncomfortable enough to make me wish I was anywhere else on the planet. Mr. Martinez, I said finally, we understand the conditions of the loan, and I promise you that we won't put ourselves in this situation again. He nodded at me, then turned back to Rebecca. Your husband seems to understand the gravity of the situation. I hope you do too. After he left, Rebecca and I sat in our kitchen, staring at the check that represented our temporary salvation and our long-term embarrassment. $3,000 from her father to cover bills that should have been paid with our own money. Money that had instead been gambled away on cryptocurrency schemes that everyone except Rebecca and Danny could see were obvious scams. We need to set some rules, I said. What kind of rules? No more investments without both of us agreeing. No more financial advice from Danny. No more risking money we can't afford to lose. She nodded, but I could see in her eyes that she was already thinking about the next opportunity, the next chance to get rich quick and solve all our problems with one brilliant investment. And if you break these rules? She asked. Then we get divorced, I said simply. Because I'm not going through this again. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life cleaning up messes caused by your brother's terrible advice. Rebecca stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to decide if I was serious. You'd really leave me over money? She asked. I'd leave you over trust, I corrected. Over the fact that you've shown me twice now that Danny's promises matter more to you than our family's security. That night, we had what I thought was an honest conversation about our marriage, our finances, and our future. Rebecca promised that she was done with get-rich-quick schemes. She swore that she'd learned her lesson about trusting Danny's investment advice. She agreed that we needed to rebuild our savings slowly and carefully, without taking risks we couldn't afford. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that losing our money twice in 6 months had finally taught her something about the difference between investing and gambling. But 3 weeks later, Danny called with news about a new investment opportunity involving NFTs and digital art that was guaranteed to revolutionize the way people thought about ownership and creativity. And Rebecca, my wife of 9 years, the mother of my children, listened to every word with the kind of rapt attention she used to reserve for bedtime stories when the kids were smaller. The pattern was starting all over again. 6 months later, I'm sitting in a lawyer's office downtown, signing divorce papers while my soon-to-be ex-wife sits across from me with her attorney, probably wondering how we got to this point. The answer is simple, really. We got here because Rebecca never learned to say no to her brother's investment schemes. Because she kept choosing easy money over family stability. Because she thought Danny's promises were more reliable than her husband's warnings. The final straw came when I discovered that she'd opened a credit card in both our names and used it to invest in something called ArtCoin that was supposedly backed by digital paintings and blockchain technology. $2,000 that we didn't have, borrowed against our future to fund another one of Danny's cryptocurrency fantasies. When I confronted her about it, she used the same arguments she'd been using for months. It was a sure thing. Danny had done his research. The technology was revolutionary. We were getting in on the ground floor of the next big thing. I didn't even argue with her. I just called Jim Kowalski, the same divorce attorney who'd handled my friend Steve's divorce 3 years earlier, and made an appointment. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. Rebecca got the house, which seemed fair since she'd need somewhere to live with the kids during her custody time. I got my retirement account, my tools, and primary custody of Lily and Sam. She also got the debt, all of it. The credit cards she'd maxed out, the loans she'd taken, the money she owed to her father. The judge agreed that since she'd made the financial decisions that created the debt, she should be responsible for paying it off. Rebecca tried to argue that the investments had been made for the benefit of the whole family, but the paper trail told a different story. Text messages with Danny discussing strategy, bank records showing unauthorized transfers, credit applications filled out without my knowledge or consent. It turns out that when you document someone's bad financial decisions over the course of 2 years, it's pretty easy to prove a pattern of reckless behavior in court. The hardest part wasn't losing the house or starting over an apartment near the kids' school. The hardest part was explaining to Lily and Sam why Mommy and Daddy weren't going to live together anymore, without telling them that their mother had gambling problems disguised as investment strategies. Is it because of Uncle Danny? Sam asked one evening, while I was helping him with his homework at my kitchen table, the one that came with the furnished apartment and wobbled whenever you leaned on it. Why would you think that? I asked, though his question didn't really surprise me. Kids notice more than adults give them credit for, and Sam had heard plenty of arguments between his mother and me about money and investments and poor decisions. Because Mommy always gets upset after Uncle Danny calls, he said. And then you and Mommy fight about money. I looked at my 7-year-old son, who was supposed to be worried about spelling tests and soccer practice instead of adult financial problems, and realized that Rebecca's choices had affected all of us in ways I was just beginning to understand. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I said, which was as honest as I could be, without destroying his relationship with his mother. And sometimes those mistakes have consequences that affect the whole family. Did Mommy make a mistake? Lily asked. She was 9 now, old enough to understand more than I wanted her to. Mommy made some decisions that didn't work out the way she hoped they would, I said. And now we all have to figure out how to move forward. It wasn't the complete truth, but it was age-appropriate truth. Someday, when they were older, they'd probably piece together the real story of how their parents' marriage ended because their mother couldn't stop gambling away the family's security on their uncle's investment schemes. For now, it was enough that they felt safe and loved and understood that the divorce wasn't their fault. These days, my life is quieter than it's been in years. The kids spend weekdays with me and every other weekend with Rebecca, who's still living in our old house and still taking financial advice from Danny, though hopefully with money that doesn't belong to me. Last month, Sam mentioned that Uncle Danny had a new business idea involving something called the metaverse and virtual real estate that was going to make everyone rich. Apparently, Rebecca had been asking the kids if they thought Daddy would be interested in investing. I told Sam to tell his mother that Daddy was very happy with his boring old savings account that earned 2% interest and never disappeared overnight. The funny thing about rock bottom is that once you hit it, the only direction left to go is up. My apartment is small, my furniture is secondhand, and my bank account isn't impressive. But for the first time in 2 years, I can sleep at night without wondering what financial disaster I'm going to wake up to. I've got custody of my kids, a job that pays the bills, and a savings account that grows slowly but steadily because I'm the only one who has access to it. I've got peace of mind that comes from knowing my financial security isn't dependent on someone else's judgment or someone else's ability to resist get-rich-quick schemes. Most importantly, I've got a clear conscience. I tried to save my marriage. I warned Rebecca about the risks. I gave her multiple chances to change course. When those didn't work, I protected myself and my children the only way I could. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their self-destructive behavior. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to let them experience the full consequences of their choices. Rebecca is still married to Danny's investment advice. She's still chasing the next big opportunity, still believing that easy money is just one more scheme away. But that's her choice now. Her risk to take, her consequences to live with. Not my money, not my problem. And for the first time in years, that feels exactly right.